All right. So now we've just finished the commercial revolution, and now we're going to talk about the beginnings of what we might call the industrious revolution. Dr. McKay, another writer, talks about this as the 18th century as the industrious revolution that basically gathers the ideas and leads us into the industrial revolution. Dr. Spivogel doesn't quite call it that. He's just kind of yapping a little bit, but I think that's a pretty easy element. So if you want to call this the industrious revolution, it's the reaction to the commercial revolution. It's the first step into the industrial revolution. With population increasing, there's a greater demand for cotton textiles. With this great demand for cotton textiles, the bourgeoisie entrepreneurs were thinking, how can we naturally meet them? Cotton originated in India. The British culturally appropriated that. They began to say, how can we utilize this for our own? So instead of using the traditional practice of India, they began to try to modernize it. The early system was the cottage industry. Here we see kind of an illustration, an etching, if you will, of what a cottage industry looks like. Cottage industry is where the peasants and artisans created a decentralized method of production. So if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm trying to sell more cotton textiles, what I have to do is I have to go to the harbor, offload my thousands of pounds of raw cotton, and then I have to go from village to village to village to village to village, and I'm going to drop those off. And now I'm going to hope that raw cotton can be turned into thread. And then maybe, if this is a little bit more advanced, this is a little bit later, maybe that thread can then be turned into textile. Who's doing the work? The peasant family. And what we begin to see here is now, think about all of the travel and all the time the entrepreneur has to go from place to place to place. It's a decentralized method of production. And then if there's not a weaver there, then he has to go from village to village and collect all the yarn and go to the artisans in which they will weave it together. It's inefficient and expensive, and it limited the production. When we begin to think the application with the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, the entrepreneurs began to fantasize about a natural order of production. And that natural order of production would be where you bring in the land, labor, and capital under one roof, and then you have machines that are governed by the natural order, controlled by natural laws, would be managed by unskilled labor, and then we would go to this capital-intensive production. This is the dream, and this is where the bourgeois begins to invest in the infrastructure. According to Dr. Spivogel, the first significant step in this industrious revolution, or the first step towards the industrial revolution, was John Kay's flying shuttle. This shifted work from a two-person loom to a one-person loom, a more efficient version. Here you see a photograph of one. So now all of a sudden, you have one person doing the work of two. If you're able to have two, you have two people doing the work of four. If you have 10 of them, you have 10 people doing the work of 20. This is exponential increase. And by the end of the decade, they were producing 300% more textile. They were taking the yarn that was being produced and rapidly producing it. Unfortunately for them, they outstretched or ran out of the supply of yarn. So now, how efficient is this? They were producing textiles from yarn so efficiently that they did not have the yarn. They did not have an appropriate production system. The single woman spinning a single spool of yarn was not efficient enough. Unfortunately, it's going to take 30 years for something to come up. And here, Dr. Spivogel doesn't drop it here. I'm a little surprised he didn't. But here we see the spinning jenny. In 1763, James Hargreaves invented the spinning jenny. And look what this one woman's able to do. She's able to spin multiple spools of yarn. Really important here, one person doing the work of dozens. What happened to the amount of yarn access? Significant. So now there's more yarn. The flying shells are producing more textiles, and yet the demand has not been reached yet. So how are we going to reach that demand? This is when they begin to realize, and they pray to the deist God maybe, that they can get an alternative powered machine. The flying shuttle, spinning jenny, these are human powered. These are not industrial. They're man-paved. It's more efficient, still done within the settings of the cottage industries. Now we see something new. Richard Arkwright's water frame becomes a dramatic change. It's the first industrial powered machine. We see this area here, this wheel with the belt. There's a floor here. There is a water wheel or some axis here. And then the rapidly flowing water would then turn that. And then as that turned the wheel, this would turn, and then that would power the creation of yarn. This is an alternative powered machine. It is no longer powered by humans. It is capital intensive production. Now you can have an unskilled person managing this while the machine is producing the goods. There's a constant source of energy. That constant source of energy helps make things more efficient. It was originally by rapidly flowing rivers. Eventually, they realized that they can use donkeys. A donkey, they would put a little carrot in front of them, I guess, and the donkey would walk around for hours, providing constant energy. This constant energy was much more efficient than human power. Much more efficient than the spinning jenny being non-human powered, but way too expensive. This was not going to fit into the cottage industries. So what happens? A group of investors begin to buy these. They may buy 10 of the water frames and put them under one roof, and the labor comes to them. This is the beginning of the factory system. In the 1760s, we see the first prototype of factories. They're not the factories, the great factories we see in the 1830s, but this is the first time in which land, labor, and capital is placed under one roof, and who has to do less traveling. Of course, the entrepreneur now can drop off the resources, let the labor manage them, and then they can go do other things. This is not something that's going to be revolutionary, but it creates the idea there could be a natural order. There's a sense of excitement. Now, to help you, to give you the evidence here, this is the evidence that I have for you guys. Look at the amount of exported cotton goods. From 1710 to 1780, what happens? Exponential growth in their trade. Think about, if they're exporting these goods, think about how much profit is coming in. When we circle here, as a result of the flying shuttle, nearly doubled from the previous one. Look what happens the year after the spinning jenny is invented. And then after several other inventions, look what happens by 1780. Exponential development. Bourgeoisie continues to invest capital in hopes of creating the next best machine. And what advances? Technology. Remember, in the 1770s, Adams has been observing the rapid urbanization, the establishment of the Bank of England, previous generation, and the practices that are here. He is writing the wealth of nations, not by creating anything, but writing and rationalizing the offense. Very significant. We're well on our way to an industrious revolution, but let's make sure you don't forget there's going to be a workers' reaction. Dr. Spavogo, if you don't use Dr. Spavogo, I would definitely Google Leeds Woolen Workers Petition. Leeds Woolen Workers Petition is a petition that they send basically to Parliament, and they ask, please stop mechanizing the lead woolen workers. They're the ones that are creating woolen goods. They're the artisans that for generations have been able to develop a way of life. Their way of life by 1786 is fading rapidly due to the cotton industries, the mechanization. They send the petition and says, please, please, please. The petition can be absolutely something you see on the AP test. But since Parliament only held the lord and gentry views, the artisan classes were completely ignored. Without the right to vote, the artisans were unheard, and specifically the gentry were caught up with the progress of the Enlightenment. The view of progress was focused on economic expansion rather than the livelihoods of the artisans. Basically, the idea is the artisans can pull themselves up by the bootstrap, whatever that means to them. So here we see the final steps towards modernity, right? We have the population has grown. We've seen this urban population. In the urban areas, we begin to see the first modern nuclear families, mom, dad, and kids. We know that they're marrying later, fewer children, birth rates drop. The agricultural revolution really creates the modern urbanization with the enclosure movement. The second commercial revolution created the modern financial system that really allows for the industrious revolution to turn into the industrial revolution. But unfortunately, as modern consumerism beginning to form, the workers are not as important as capital. The laboring class will have a difficult time. That will be much more in Unit 6 that we'll see. I hope that makes sense. With that said, we are going to pause here and I'll do the social crisis later.